Good morning and happy Tuesday. Today's topic is Chapter 7, which deals with business marketing. Business marketing and consumer marketing differ in a variety of ways, and we're going to look at those today. We're also going to examine how, in the business world, we segment customers, and we'll end up with a discussion of the importance of customer service in the business to business marketing area. It's much more important than it is in the B2C area. And when you understand why, when we take a look at the differences between the two, it'll become quite clear that business to business is built a lot more on customer service than we tend to find business to consumer is. But let's start with some basics. Business to business transactions tend to use the internet a lot more than business to consumer transactions. Now, I know we're all familiar with ordering things from Amazon or another online retailer. But what we find is business to business users tend to be much more reliant on it. And they're more reliant for a variety of reasons. The biggest one is we want a nice, simple way to facilitate communications and orders. If you look back over time, we received orders in the business to business space using something called a purchase order. And a purchase order was a handwritten, or if you were lucky, computer generated document that told us as a supplier how many of a unit to deliver, what color, if there was an option, where to deliver them, and then we would send back, here's our price based upon our current cost structure. Companies today, when they're running on such lean inventory levels, can't wait for that exchange of paperwork. So now what we have are systems that automatically talk to each other. And when one of our customers is running low on a product, let's say we provide screws and bolts, when they're running low on screws and bolts, it automatically triggers a reorder with us. No human interaction. And we've gone from a day or a 2-day long process down to something that lasts a millisecond. The second big thing is we've discovered brand awareness and the importance of branding in the B2B market. For years, we really didn't worry about that. We thought that branding was much more of a consumer area where consumers had to come up with these visions of what a brand was or what a product stood for. Today, we realize that the same psychology that goes into selecting a lot of products in the B2C side is used in the B2B side. And therefore, we need a way of differentiating ourselves using branding so that the consumer can tell us apart. So you'll notice that John Deere, for example, really separates itself from the way Caterpillar operates in the construction equipment market. But when you get into the agricultural market, where Deere is much better known, they separate themselves from their competitors, whether it's Cat again on their ag side, or somebody like New Holland or Case IH in a totally different way, but it's all branding. And the third reason we tend to use the internet a lot more is because of the amount of information we provide our customers. Unlike B2C sales, B2B sales are often primarily based upon information flow and knowledge of the product, and minute knowledge of the product. When you go to buy a car, you might be interested in the size of the motor and the transmission. But you probably, unless you're a car nut, don't get down into the nitty-gritty details about the functioning of that engine, how it mates to that transmission, how many pound-foot of torque it can put out at a specific area, or in a specific tack range, or how many horsepower it develops and in what gear. But that's incredibly important to a B2B purchaser, whether they're the Grand Forks or your local fire department looking to purchase a new piece of fire apparatus, the police department, or Burlington Northern Santa Fe when they're looking to purchase a brand new locomotive. So we've got a lot of information flowing, and we're using this to help position ourselves in the marketplace. It goes back to that branding concept. We're trying to position ourselves as a thought leader in the industry by publishing all sorts of results of the testing of our products and how our products stack up to the competition. The next big thing to consider is this concept of the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things basically says we're taking all these dumb products we've had for years, storage bins, equipment, and we're loading them up with sensors so that we, as the vendor or as the supplier, can predict an issue of importance to our customer before that issue becomes critical. So earlier I talked about the example of the nuts and the bolts supplier and how when a certain level is reached, we automatically reorder. Well, what we could do is, instead of doing a physical count, which is probably how they were doing it now, we could put a sensor on the storage container where our nuts are located. And when a certain level is reached in that storage container, automatically triggers a reorder. Or we can put sensors on bobcats so that they start to look for when parts are about to fail. We can alert the operator that he has a potential problem, and we can dispatch a service team to make sure it arrives before that problem becomes a reality. So the Internet of Things is really going to change the way we operate in the business-to-business sales side. Relationship marketing and strategic alliances are much more important in business-to-business sales. We want to have a long-term relationship with our customers. And the best way to get that is to start to develop a strategic relationship. We want to be part of the customer's design process, so we know from the beginning what we're expected to do, and we can prepare accordingly. Why has this come about? Well, customers are much more demanding than they have been in the past. Customers will demand things like delivery schedule, being within tolerance 99.999% of the time, Six Sigma quality. What they're looking for is a supplier that they can rely on to provide a product that they've ordered in the quantity required, on time, and on budget. And the best way to do that is to develop this really tight relationship between the two parties involved. The way we do this is through licensing or distribution agreements on the strategic alliance side. So what you find is big players will often license their technology to a local partner to produce, because that local partner is supplying a branch of the firm that the original company is used to dealing with. An example. Boeing is trying to expand its airline business into the Asian market. They don't have enough capacity in their North American operations, despite the fact that they've expanded them, to satisfy the need of the Asian market, which is estimated at something like 26,000 aircraft over the next 20 years. So what they did is they entered into a strategic alliance with China Aircraft. That strategic alliance allowed Boeing to capture share of the market, which is good against Airbus, but it also allows them to take advantage of a local partner. And that could mean even more sales, as companies, especially the Chinese airlines, which are going to be the big purchasers, will probably favor a Chinese operation over a non-Chinese operation for the simple reason that the government owns both of them. It just makes economic sense. We do see research consortia. Best example of that is to take a look at the search for a successful vaccine for Ebola. Here we've seen the US, Canada, a variety of African nations, the European Union come together in a research consortia to try and solve a particular problem. But Boeing does the same thing. If you take a look at the Boeing Dreamliner or even the new Boeing 777, it has parts made all over the world. And what they've done is, as a company, they've established research consortia with different companies, whether it's in Australia, Japan, Italy, Canada, to build specific parts of that aircraft and then have them shipped to Renton, where they're assembled into the 777 or the Dreamliner. The last thing we look at is, for any of these to work, it has to be built on commitment and trust. Companies do not enter into joint ventures or strategic alliances on a whim. They take a long time to enter into these things because they have to meld their operations to some degree. And that requires tremendous change within the corporation and the way the corporation operates. So to accomplish that, they tend to make sure that each party is fully committed and trusts the other party before they sign on the bottom line. I've given you the example of Qantas and American Airlines tying together. So Qantas and American Airlines setting up a joint venture to allow for passengers to easily get from the US to Australia and vice versa. So if you have a look at that video, that'll give you an idea about the level of trust and commitment required. The last piece before you watch the video I'd recommend is this. Take a look at relationships in other cultures. If you look especially in the European and the Asian cultures, relationships between competitors or between suppliers and their vendors are very tight. In Japan, it's called karetsu. And what you find there is you have an interlocking web of bankers, suppliers, manufacturers, service providers of all sorts, all working together to move forward. Usually it's driving the core manufacturing firm. So take a look at that chapter we did on other cultures. Go back and think about how Japan would influence that. One more thing before you go off and watch the video about Qantas and American. There are typically 4 major categories of business customers. The first one is called producers. They're the people that produce the end product. Sometimes they're referred to as an original equipment manufacturer. John Deere's an OEM or a producer. Boeing's an OEM or a producer. Miramax, who makes films, producer. Okay. They're the end of the line. They're supported by a whole vendor stream that provides all the spare parts or all the composite parts they need to make their final product. We then have what are called resellers. Resellers are the retail and the wholesale intermediaries that take a product from the producer and get it to its end user. Now, in some cases, if it's a big piece of equipment, it's a direct sale from the OEM to the end user. So most airlines get their aircraft from Boeing or Airbus, for example. But sometimes you'll go through an intermediary. If they're leasing aircraft, the leasing company buys them, then they lease them out to the airline. In that case, the leasing company is a reseller in that instance. As consumers, we're much more familiar with the retail side. So if we want a box of Raisin Bran, Kellogg's Raisin Bran, we don't call up Kellogg's in Battle Creek, Michigan, and ask them to direct ship us 1 box of Raisin Bran. That's horribly inefficient. What Kellogg's does is they sell a couple of boxcar loads of Raisin Bran to an intermediary. Usually it's a wholesaler owned by the retailer who then distributes maybe a pallet of Raisin Bran to your favorite retailer who puts the boxes on the shelf so you can buy them. That's a great example of how consumers see the reseller side of business-to-business marketing. Government is also a key player in this marketplace, and that breaks down into both your federal, your state, your local, your county governments. Those are huge purchasers of everything from paper clips to jet aircraft. Okay? And the last one is institutions. Hospitals, universities, colleges, anything that is a large purchaser but doesn't fall into either a producer, government, or whatever. All right, go and have a look at that video on Qantas and American Airlines. Come on back, and when you do, let's talk a bit about the differences between the consumer and the business-to-business market.